Okay. Cool. Okay, great. Cool. So, when you arrived in Australia, what were your first impressions of Australia?
Funnily enough, about my first impressions of Australia are not, I don't have any. The very, very, very first thing of seeing the land, I don't recall it any more than I recall the actual moment of leaving Glasgow. That's the weird thing. So I've got a very good long-term memory. But we arrived at Fremantle on Western Australia's southwest bit to go into Perth for the day. And that's what all the ships did. I think that was the first time you saw Australia. And so we were going ashore for the day, that big excitement. And the impression I have then of being on a bus, my mother or father were talking to a Scottish the bus driver, and he was gloating over the tremendous wages he was getting. You know, he'd come from Glasgow as we had sailed from there, and he just said how much he made every month, and they were spellbound. You know, they couldn't believe it. And I can remember feeling excited because as we were going to the seaside, and the sun was shining, of course, glinting off all these silver lamp standards as you went past. And a few miles and you came into the city of Perth. And I can remember then it seemed very nice, you know, green. There were watering lawns everywhere and it was hot. This was December, very hot summer. And there were Christmas decorations up, but it was very hot. Well, that was odd. So we went and had an ice cream and maybe a meal, I can't remember. But I was just very excited. And the interesting thing was, in Perth, suddenly it wasn't foreign. You know, we'd been in Aden and Colombo and the Suez Canal, and everybody was speaking Arabic and different things. Suddenly we were in a place where they spoke English, and nobody sort of stared at you. Whereas in Aden, they were all looking at you, know, even through the burqas, you know. And nobody tried to get you to buy anything. So Mum and Dad were really happy that they were now in the country to which we were going. It was like home, but very different as well. But you weren't in a foreign country anymore. So that was my first impression. And then we sailed round the south to get across to Melbourne. That wasn't so good because the Great Australian Bight, the sea is like this. And we were sick for days, I think. It was dreadful.
So how were you homesick? So we got here about New South Wales and disconnect with Wales that you knew, and your first Christmas.
My homesickness was, I think, just because of my age. I think if I had been 12, 13, 14, it wouldn't have happened at all, probably, or been much shorter lived. We sailed round and docked in Melbourne, assuming, I think, that we were to go to Williamstown Hostel, a migrant centre. But we had to go up on a train, and I don't remember understanding why this was. And it was now evening, early evening, onto a train which went inland across Victoria and just to the boundary of New South Wales, as it happens. Now, I noticed we're on this, and it was something about going to a sorting out centre of Bonegilla, I think they call it, and near the town of Albury in New South Wales. And I noticed in the train, it was hot. It was December, boiling hot. Everybody was sort of opening their shirts. The grass was all brown, nothing green, and the train was belting along. And instead of the rolling of the ship now, it was the clickety-clack, 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 clickety-clack. And I thought, why is it looking like this? My mother said, well, it's different here. When it's winter in England, it's summer here, so it's going to be Christmas. It'll be nice and hot, and it's better than having snow and ice. Well, I'd have liked to have seen snow, build a snowman, but that was off the cards, you know. So it was, I remember falling asleep, feeling this terrible, lonely, empty thing. I was with my parents and my brother, but all the others were right beyond reach. You know, and I can remember feeling a bit devastated. Now, when we got to Albury, sometime in the night, later on, they said it was in New South Wales. Well, I knew Wales. We used to go from Manchester round to Llandudno, Rhyl. We'd go for trips out. And I thought, this is nothing like it. You know, it's sort of brown grass and boiling hot. That wasn't like the Wales I'd seen. So I was confused. But I don't think that would have happened if I'd been older. And my brother was a baby. He didn't know where he was at that stage. He'd had his second birthday about a week before. So he doesn't remember any of that.
So your family stayed in 3 hostels while you were in Australia. Can you tell us which hostels they were and how long you stayed in each?
While we were in Australia, we were in 3 hostels, one after the other. The first one was this one at Bonegilla, near Albury. It seems to me that was a sorting out centre of people. They'd farmed them out from there to various places in the states around New South Wales, Victoria, maybe Queensland as well. And we were just to be there for 3 weeks. I can see now why. Anyway, it was the Christmas, New Year holiday, the summer holiday. It's been like 6 weeks. So there's no school or anything. And we were put in this big place it was. And they've kept part of it open, as I found out many years later on revisiting. They kept it open as a sort of living museum of migration. And we were in a white cabin sort of thing with a couple of bedrooms in. There was a big type of fir tree or something outside on a little lawn. And my dad got permission, I think he might have initiated this, to decorate it with coloured lights and things for Christmas, which was about to come. And they did that, and all the migrants were there putting things on, and they were singing "In the Bleak Midwinter," and I thought, it's not the bleak midwinter, it's height of summer. And it was Christmas. Father Christmas came on this big white motorised wooden horse the next day, and he gave us, every kid had a present. I had a little motorboat that actually worked, but there was something seriously wrong with it. They're singing Christmas carols, and it's baking hot and shorts on and T-shirts and ice cream, and it wasn't right. But again, I wouldn't have felt like that if it was now. I was a little child, and Christmas had been quite magical back home with if it was snow that we got. And you'd go to bed and there'd be all these things flying around, strange insects, and getting bitten by mosquitoes was a new experience. So again, it wasn't a bad place, but I was not brilliantly happy. It was Christmas, that was nice, but it was hot. We went on 1 or 2 outings to somewhere called Hume Reservoir on the River Murray, and that was nice. It had lots of water and cooling things, and you could paddle. I couldn't swim then, but it was we had some good times. But after a mere 3 weeks, we were taken back in a coach down to the coast, back to Melbourne, and finally to Williamstown. Williamstown Hostel was the next one. It later became known as Altona Migrant Centre. I think it was like a concentration camp, just rows of awful-looking huts, a big canteen. Its only redeeming feature was that it was right next to Williamstown Beach. That wasn't bad at all, but I just hated it. It's not the fault of anybody there. It was comfortable enough, but it's just, again, I was still thinking back to the ones I'd missed from home, and then of course school started. That was the next adventure.
And what was the third hostel?
The third hostel after Williamstown was Nunawading. Now Williamstown was on the west side of Melbourne on Port Phillip Bay. Nunawading was on the east side, and so many miles out, 5 or 6 miles I think. And that was those silver Nissen huts that you get. And divided down the length, so there's a family in each half. And they were relatively civilised, that was okay. But the difference in Nunawading was that our school was on site and teachers came and taught us. And I loved that much more than the school in Williamstown, although I've said it was a good place, a good school, but I was not in the frame of mind to appreciate my term or two there.
Can you describe how did your father work to make life at the hostel more like a home for you?
While we were in the hostel, particularly, I think he did the first part of this in Williamstown. He made out of plywood, I don't know, chipboard or something, wood anyway. He made a sort of mock fireplace, put it against the wall. It had a mantelpiece, and they had a kerosene, or paraffin we'd call it, heater. Because although Australia's hot, in June, July, August, it gets a bit nippy sometimes, your hands cold. So they'd have that when they needed it. And he did the same brought the same one into Nunawading Hostel. He got a car at that time too, which made life easier. And yeah, they made the place look good. They'd crated up and brought out a big washing machine they'd got at home. Very primitive by today's standards. But that had sailed out before us or with us or whatever. And they tried to make it as near to home as they could. But Dad, yeah, he did that. He also later he'd got quite a lot of initiative, and he got big reels of film, must have hired them, and he put on film shows in Nunawading, so matinee for children, and then Saturday nights for everybody or adults, and I think a night in the week as well, because nobody had television. We didn't know about television then, and so yeah, Dad played a bit of a part in organising some social things there.
So this is now look back to school. So it's still
6 minutes.
Okay, 6 minutes. Okay, cool. Let's stop that there then.
We could probably do one more, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So your mother's descriptions of your school life in the letters are a bit rosier than your experience of your school.
Yeah, somewhat.
At least at the beginning. So can you tell us a bit about this disparity between your actual experiences and what you're saying?
My schooling in Australia, really, it was two places. While we were in Williamstown, I went to Williamstown State School. It's now called Williamstown Primary School. Big granite building and a bell tower and things, and it looked a bit foreboding, but it was actually, I can see it was a good school. A lot of migrant children went through that, as I've later learned. But I was there, still missing home back here. You got knocked about and you had to fight for a place on the bus, and you got bullied. And it was a strict regime. You'd be marching around in the playground, and then I had this lady called Miss Coughlin. I thought it was Miss Cogland, but it was Miss Coughlin. And she was good. She'd give you little pink stars on your work if it was good and neat. But we were learning to write. And that pen in the inkwell, writing like this. And suddenly she walked round and said, "Your writing's too spiced out." You know, well, you try and put it right, not to be too spaced out. And then she comes back and says, "Get out the front, I'm going to strap you." So you got the strap. And that was a shock, really. I mean, it's not that I'm against punishment and corporal punishment. I don't think that's what was the right answer to that. So I was unhappy. I wanted to go to the toilet, but she said no, and I wet myself. So I had to wander around soaking wet, and some house adjoining the school, the kindly neighbour, I just went, "I've wet myself," you know, and she, "Oh dear." So she gave me or lent me a pair of her son's underpants, and my mother sent them back clean and all that. And things like that made me unhappy. But I don't think that this isn't to make out that the school was bad. Miss Coughlin taught us some good things. I remember one lady coming to teach us religious education. She told us really wonderful stories, and we sang things. And there's a man who did music. So my mother's thing, though, she was desperately trying to encourage her parents all the time. "Oh, Nigel's doing really well at school." Well, I was largely, but there were things that I didn't tell her, and things that she didn't know how I really felt. And she'd say I was doing really well in arithmetic, but that was just stretching the truth to breaking point, because if I added 1 and 1 up, they made 11. You know, I just couldn't do maths, and I never have been able to, apart from the tables. I was good at spelling and English and things like that, but overall, Williamstown, the school there, I was unhappy. It wasn't the school's fault, it was just my homesickness and then some bad experiences. But in Nunawading, there was a Mr. Kett, Mr. Trimble, Miss Burke. They were all Australian, but they came in every day and were in the Nissan. So it was familiar territory. And I think they had good discipline. They taught us a lot. So looking back, that was much nicer. But it's not to say that the other school was bad. I'd like that to be clear in everything.
So you think that you're...
Sorry, we're going to
stop it.
pause there for a second.